The pot was empty before the boys sat down, but Tavutsi Red Willow kept stirring it, as though patience might thicken water into supper. Outside, the wind came down from the San Juan peaks with teeth in it. It slipped through the chinks between the pine logs, lifted ash from the hearth, and made the rawhide hinges on the door creak like a tired animal. The Animas River below the cabin had not yet frozen solid, but it spoke under its skin of ice in low broken groans, the sound of something alive being held down. Tavutsi stood over the fire with one hand wrapped in a rag and the other on the wooden spoon. Smoke had reddened her eyes. Hunger had hollowed the soft places beneath her cheekbones. She was 28 years old and looked in that thin gray light as if winter had already laid one hand upon her shoulder. At the table, Nakai watched her. He was 12, though the last year had pulled his face longer and sharper, the way drought pulls a creek into a narrow black line. His father's old knife lay hidden beneath the edge of his blanket on the bench close enough for his fingers to find. He did not know why he kept it there. There was nothing inside the cabin to fight except cold, and cold could not be cut. Beside him, little Toma swung his feet above the dirt floor and tried to smile. "Is it almost ready, Ma?" he asked. Tavutsi did not turn. Almost. The word came out soft, too soft. Nakai heard the lie in it before the lie had a shape. There had been a time when the cabin smelled of meat fat and blue corn of coffee, when Chaska Red Willow came in from the hunting trail of willow bark drying by the door and wet moccasins steaming near the fire. There had been laughter then, low and steady from his father, bright and sudden from Toma, quiet from his mother who smiled more with her eyes than her mouth. That was before the fever, before the winter storm sealed the trail, before his father's body was wrapped and carried out beneath a sky so white it seemed God had turned his face away from the valley. Since then, the cabin had become a place of smaller sounds. A spoon scraping a pot. A woman cutting one strip of meat into pieces too thin to call meat. A boy pretending not to hear his mother's stomach when it turned against itself in the night. Tavutsi reached to the shelf and took down the last strip of smoked venison. It had hung there 3 days, getting smaller in everyone's mind, though no one had touched it. She laid it on the block and cut it in two. Nakai saw at once there would be no peace for her. His throat tightened. Toma leaned forward, eyes wide. "Is that deer?" "It is," Tavutsi said, from Pa's smokehouse. Her hand paused, only for a moment. "Yes." That was another kind of lie, though, not a false one. The meat had passed through Chaska's smokehouse before he died. The memory of his hands was still on everything in that cabin. The table legs he had shaped the roof beam, he had lifted the notch in the door frame where he had marked Nakai's height each spring. Tavutsi dropped the 2 pieces of meat into the thin meal and stirred. Then she poured the watery supper into 2 wooden bowls, one for Nakai, one for Toma. She set them down carefully as though they were full dishes at a feast. Toma looked at the bowls, then at her. "Where's yours?" Tavutsi wiped her hands on her apron. Her fingers trembled, so she folded them into the cloth. "I ate earlier," she said, "while you boys were gathering kindling." Nakai lowered his eyes. The cabin seemed to go still around the words. Tama believed her because he wanted to. Children were merciful that way. They took the world as it was handed to them, even when it came in broken pieces. Nakai did not believe her. He had been with Toma gathering kindling. He had seen her through the window, then sitting beside the cold hearth with her hands pressed together, not praying exactly, but holding herself as if she might come apart if she let go. He wanted to call her out. He wanted to say, "No, you didn't." He wanted to push his bowl across the table and make her eat. But shame rose in him hot and bitter. Shame that he had nothing to give her. Shame that he was not his father. Shame that he could see the lie and still be hungry enough to lift the spoon. Tavutsi touched Toma's hair. "Eat before it cools." The little boy obeyed. Nakai waited. His mother looked at him then and he saw the plea in her eyes. Not for food, never for food. She was asking him to let the lie stand. So he ate. The meal had almost no taste. Cornmeal, smoke water, and the ghost of venison. Toma scraped his bowl with his spoon, trying to catch every grain. Nakai chewed slowly, forcing each swallow past the stone in his throat. Tavutsi turned away and busied herself at the shelf, moving things that did not need moving. An empty flour sack, a twist of thread, a cracked cup. Her back was straight, but her shoulders had begun to shake. Nakai saw. He bent over his bowl and pretended not to. A mother's lie can be the last warm thing in a starving house. Outside, beyond the yellow square of window light, a man stood among the pines with snow gathering on the shoulders of his buckskin coat. Elias Boone had followed the smoke because evening was coming hard, and a man in the mountains did not pass a chimney without marking it in his mind. He had meant to ask if the lower trail still held open near the river crossing, maybe trade a pinch of coffee for news, maybe warm his hands if the house allowed strangers. He had not meant to witness anything. His mule waited behind him in the trees, breath steaming. 2 beaver traps hung from the pack saddle. A rifle rested in the crook of his arm. He was a broad, weather-scored man with a beard gone gray at the chin and eyes that had spent too many years measuring distance, weather tracks, and danger. There were men who could watch hunger and keep walking. Elias had been one once, or had tried to be. Through the small window, he saw the woman standing with her back to the children. He saw the boys eating. He saw no third bowl. He saw the way the older boy looked at his mother, then looked down, carrying knowledge too heavy for his age. The sight struck Elias in a place he thought the years had buried. He was 10 again. Missouri mud outside the door, his mother smiling with a face gone pale and thin. Her saying, "I ate already, Eli. You take it." Him believing her because hunger made belief convenient. Him finding her 2 mornings later on the floor beside the stove, one hand still reaching for a log she had not had the strength to lift. Elias stepped back from the window as if the cabin had burned him. Inside, Toma finished his bowl and smiled. "That was good," he said with the brave gratitude of a child who had been given too little and loved the giver too much. Tavutsi turned around. Her face was calm again. She crossed the room and took his bowl. "I'm glad." Nakai rose quickly. "I'll bring in more wood. There's enough for tonight. I'll bring more." He needed the cold. He needed the dark. He needed somewhere to put the anger that had no proper target. His mother was not to blame. Toma was not to blame. His father had not chosen to die. Even the mountains were only mountains standing there with snow on their backs like old judges who had seen too much to care. Tavutsi studied him. "Stay close." "I will." He took his coat from the peg and stepped outside. The cold hit him hard enough to make his eyes water. He stood on the porch, breathing through his nose, fists tight. The yard lay in blue shadow. A thin trail led to the woodpile, another down toward the river, another into the trees where his father used to disappear with a rifle over his shoulder. Nakai looked toward those trees. For a moment, he thought he saw something move. "Who's there?" he called. No answer came. Only wind, only pine branches knocking softly together, only the river groaning under its ice. Elias Boone stood farther back in the timber, still as a stump hidden by dusk and falling snow. He could have spoken. He could have stepped forward, explained himself, offered something from his pack. There was coffee in his saddlebag, a little flour, some beans. Salt pork enough for one man's supper. Not much, but more than the cabin had. His hand shifted toward the mule rope. Then he stopped. He saw the boy's face in the half-light, proud, afraid, too ready to hate any man who came near that door. Elias knew that look. It was the look of a boy guarding the place where grief lived. A stranger walking in with pity could wound a house worse than hunger. So Elias did what he had done most of his life. He turned away. Nakai stood listening until his ears hurt from the cold. When nothing moved again, he gathered 3 pieces of wood and carried them inside. Tavutsi had tucked Toma under the blanket near the hearth. The little boy was already drifting toward sleep, one hand beneath his cheek. The empty bowl sat washed on the shelf. The pot hung over the fire with nothing in it but steam. Nakai set down the wood. His mother looked at him. Something out there. He thought of the movement in the trees. He thought of the knife under his blanket. He thought of his father's trade token gone months now to Silas Voss's post for flour that had not lasted. "No," he said. Tavutsi nodded, though she did not believe him any more than he had believed her. Later, after the fire had burned low and the cabin settled into its night sounds, Tavutsi sat awake beside her sons. Toma slept curled beneath the blanket. Nakai pretended to sleep with his face turned toward the wall. She reached out and touched each boy lightly as if counting them against the dark. Then she pressed one hand to her stomach and closed her eyes. No prayer came, only breath. Far up the trail, Elias Boone reached his camp beneath a stand of spruce. He fed the mule, set his rifle by the log, and stirred the coals he had banked that morning. Sparks rose into the black air and vanished. He put beans in a small iron pan, added a strip of salt pork, poured coffee into a tin cup. The smell should have comforted him. Instead, it turned his stomach. He sat with the food in his lap and saw the widow's hand cutting the last meat in 2. Saw the little boy asking why she had no bowl. Saw the older boy lowering his head to protect the only lie his mother had left. The wind moved through the spruce tops with a long, mournful sound. Elias lifted the spoon, held it there, then let it fall back into the pan. "Damn it," he whispered. The word went nowhere. The mountains took it and gave nothing back. He looked toward the valley, though the cabin was hidden by darkness and timber. For a long time he did not move. Then he reached for his coat, pulled it tighter around him, and sat staring into the fire like a man watching an old sin climb out of the flames. Snow began to fall harder. By morning, the trail to Silas Voss's trading post would be mean and slick. Elias knew that. He also knew he would be on it before sunup. By the time Elias Boone reached his camp, the beans in his pack felt heavier than iron. He had made that camp 2 days earlier beneath a stand of black spruce where the wind broke against the trees before it came down to the creek. A small lean-to of pine boughs leaned against a deadfall. His mule stood tied near a patch of dry grass he had uncovered with his boot. The animal lifted its head when Elias came in, ears twitching, nostrils white with frost. Elias said nothing to it. He set his rifle against a log, took off his hat, and stood for a long while beside the fire pit, listening to the night settle over the San Juan country. Snow ticked softly through the spruce needles. Somewhere down the slope, the Animas River groaned under its skin of ice. Farther off, a fox barked once and went quiet. The mountains had a way of making a man feel honest, not good, not forgiven, just honest. Elias knelt and stirred the coals he had buried under ash that morning. A small red eye opened in the dark. He fed it shavings, then twigs, then a wrist-thick piece of pine. The flame came up slow and yellow, bending in the wind. He should have been grateful for it. Instead, he saw the widow's stove. He saw Tavutsi Red Willow standing over that empty pot, moving her spoon through water as if motion itself might become food. He saw the 2 boys at the table. The little one with hope still loose in his face. The older one with his eyes lowered, old enough to know the truth and too hungry to challenge it. Elias reached into his pack and pulled out his own supper. Beans wrapped in cloth, a strip of salt pork, coffee in a small leather pouch, more than that cabin had seen in days. He set the pan over the fire, poured in water, and watched the beans roll and darken. The pork gave off its smell, rich and greasy. His stomach twisted with need, then with shame. He lifted the spoon. The widow's voice came back to him. "I ate earlier." His hand stopped halfway to his mouth. The words had been soft, gentle, practiced. A woman did not learn to lie that way in one evening. She learned it night after night, shaving pieces off herself so her children might sleep believing there would be enough tomorrow. Elias lowered the spoon. Snow gathered on his shoulders. He did not brush it away. He had heard those words before in another house in another winter when he was a boy, with mud on his boots and hunger in his belly. Missouri had not had mountains like these, but winter had known the road to their door all the same. His father had died beneath a falling oak, crushed before the neighbors could lift the trunk. After that, his mother had stretched every sack, every rind, every spoonful of meal. She had smiled too. Lord, how she had smiled. "I ate already. Eli," she used to say, pushing the plate toward him, "you take it while it's warm." He had believed her because he was 10 years old, and hunger made a coward of the mind. Belief was easier than asking why her hands shook, easier than seeing how her dress hung looser each week, easier than noticing she sat down only after he and his little sister had finished. Then one morning he found her on the floor by the stove. Her hand had been stretched toward the wood box. One split log lay just beyond her fingers. Her eyes were open, fixed on nothing, and her lips were cracked from fever and want. She lived 3 more days, but not truly, not in any way a boy could call living. Some men ride away because they are cruel. Others ride away because mercy reminds them of what they failed to save. Elias had spent the rest of his life riding. He rode out of Missouri before his beard came in. He trapped the Platte, crossed bitter passes, slept in buffalo robes, learned the language of tracks, weather, and distance. He had known Arapaho traders, Ute hunters, French packers, drunk miners, starving soldiers, and men who would trade their own brother for a dry blanket. He had watched rivers flood and freeze. He had seen good men buried shallow because the ground was too hard to open. But he had never forgotten the sound of that log rolling loose from his mother's dead hand. The beans boiled over. Elias cursed under his breath and pulled the pan from the fire. He tried again to eat. The food turned to clay in his mouth. He swallowed once, then set the pan aside. His mule watched him with the patient judgment of animals. "Don't look at me like that," Elias muttered. The mule chewed on nothing and blinked. Elias sat until the fire burned low. He told himself the widow had pride, and pride was a fence a man ought not climb without invitation. He told himself she had kin somewhere. He told himself Silas Voss would not let a woman and 2 boys starve outright, ledger or no ledger. But each excuse came apart as soon as he laid it down. He had seen the empty pot. Before dawn he rose. The cold had hardened the world. His blanket cracked with frost when he shook it. The creek stones wore white caps. He saddled the mule by feel fingers aching inside his gloves, then strapped on his traps and the pelts he had meant to save for a better market. Beaver, fox, mink, one dark otter pelt fine enough to fetch silver from a trader in Durango if a man had patience. Elias did not have patience left. The trail to Silas Voss's trading post ran along the creek, then dipped through cottonwoods before climbing to a rutted wagon road used by miners, packers, and Ute families moving between winter camps. Snow had fallen over old tracks, but Elias read what remained. 2 mules passed yesterday, 1 shod horse with a cracked left shoe, a man on foot dragging his right heel, deer moving high, rabbit near willow. The land spoke clear because people mostly lied. By mid-morning, the trading post came into view, hunched against the slope like something that had grown tired of standing. It was built of dark logs and patched boards with a sod roof crusted in snow. A split-rail pen leaned beside it. 3 tired horses stood there with their tails to the wind. Smoke rose from a pipe chimney and flattened under the low sky. A sign above the door read Voss Goods and Provisions, though one corner had broken loose and knocked softly against the wall. Elias tied the mule and stepped inside. Warmth hit him first, then smells coffee, tobacco, flour dust, lamp oil, wet wool, and old leather. The store was narrow shelves stacked with tins, sacks, traps, candles, bolts of cloth, salt blocks, cartridges, and cheap beads in cloudy jars. Behind the counter stood Silas Voss, thin as a fence rail, with gray hair combed flat and spectacles low on his nose. Silas looked up from his ledger. Boone. Voss. Trails mean. Winter generally is. Silas grunted and dipped his pen. You selling or begging selling? That's a mercy. Beggar's been thick lately. Elias untied the bundle of pelts and laid them across the counter. Silas's eyes sharpened. He lifted the otter pelt first, running his fingers along the fur with the care of a preacher touching Bible paper. This is good. I know. Too good for here. I know that too. Silas glanced over his spectacles. Then you're either desperate or foolish. Maybe both. The trader smiled without warmth. What are you wanting? Flour, beans, salt, coffee, dried apples if you've got them. Sugar. Silas's brows rose at the last word. Sugar? You found yourself a bride up in them hills? No. A celebration then? No. Silas waited. Elias did not fill the silence. At last the trader leaned back. That much provision for one man will sour before you eat it. It ain't for me. Silas's face changed not much but enough. His eyes moved toward the window, toward the direction of the river cabins. For who Red Willow Widow? The pen in Silas's hand stopped. Outside wind worried the loose sign against the wall. Knock, 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 Tavutsi, Silas said. Elias said nothing. Silas closed the ledger halfway. She sends you no. Then she won't take it. She will if it's trade. She has nothing to trade worth this. She makes baskets. Silas snorted. A willow basket for an otter pelt? That's trader's madness. Then write me down mad. Silas studied him for a long breath. You know what folks will say if you ride up to that cabin with goods? Folks say something every time their mouths get lonely. This is different. She's Ute. She's widowed, proud as a hawk. There are men in this valley don't like kindness crossing certain thresholds. And there are others who'll think there's something owed behind it. Elias's jaw tightened. Nothing's owed. That ain't how talk works. Hunger's worse than talk. Silas looked away first. He opened the ledger and turned pages with one long finger. Elias saw the names. Miners owing for powder, mule drivers owing for whiskey, families owing for flour salt thread. Then Silas stopped at a narrow column written in careful ink. Tavutsi Red Willow. Flour 5 pounds. Salt, lamp oil, needle packet, cornmeal, thread. No whiskey, no tobacco, no foolishness. Only small things meant to keep a house alive. She pays when she can. Silas said softer now. Baskets, mending, beadwork. Once she brought dried berries when there weren't berries enough for birds. Never asked outright. Just stood there with what she had and waited for me to name it fair. And did you? Silas's mouth drew thin. Fair enough for a store that has to stay open. Elias looked at him. Color rose under the trader's weathered skin. Don't stand there judging me, Boone. Credit stretches only so far. I give free goods to every sad face from here to the La Plata, and by spring there won't be a store for anybody. I ain't asking you to give. No, you're asking me to pretend a basket is worth half my shelf. I'm paying." Silas looked again at the pelts. The otter alone could cover plenty. All of them together covered far more than flour and beans. "This is too much," he said. "Then add more." Silas shook his head slowly, but he began pulling goods from shelves: a flour sack, a smaller sack of beans, salt wrapped tight, coffee, dried apples, a cone of dark sugar. He hesitated, then added a little packet of tea and a twist of peppermint candy. Elias noticed, but said nothing. While Silas tied the goods, his eyes kept drifting toward a small drawer beneath the counter. At last he opened it and took out a round brass trade token strung on a worn leather cord. The metal had been rubbed smooth at the edges. A small mark had been scratched into one side, a crude willow branch. "She pawned this in August," Silas said. "Said she'd buy it back after the first good basket sale." Elias looked at the token. "Her husband's." Silas nodded. "Chaska Red Willow carried it. Used it when he traded here. Fine hunter, quiet man, paid his debts and never let another man speak down to his family." Elias reached for the token. Silas pulled it back slightly. She didn't want to part with it. Then she shouldn't have had to. The words came out harder than Elias meant. Silas met his eyes, and for the first time there was no ledger between them. Only two old men, each with a different kind of shame. After a moment, Silas placed the token on top of the flour sack. "You give her that careful," he said. "Food fills shelves. That thing opens graves." Elias picked it up and felt its small weight settle into his palm. He thought of Tavutsi's empty pot, thought of the boy lowering his eyes to protect her lie, thought of his own mother's hand reaching for wood that never reached the stove. "I know," he said. Outside, the sky had lowered. Snow came steady now, fine and hard. Elias loaded the mule in silence. Silas stood in the doorway with his arms folded, watching him lash the flour beans, coffee, salt apples, sugar tea candy, and the past itself beneath a canvas cover. When Elias put his boot in the stirrup, Silas called after him. "Boone." Elias turned. "She'll refuse. Likely. She may hate you for seeing. Likely. And that boy of hers may hate you worse." Elias looked toward the river trail where the widow's cabin waited under snow and pride and hunger. "Then I'll stand where I'm hated," he said, "so long as they eat." He turned the mule toward the Animus and rode into the white morning, carrying enough food to fill a shelf and one small brass token heavy enough to break a widow's heart all over again. Snow came down in fine white needles, steady enough to blur the trees, but not thick enough to hide the sound of the mule. Tavutsi Red Willow heard it before she saw anything. She was outside by the chopping stump, splitting kindling with hands that no longer closed right in the cold. The hatchet had grown dull, and each blow jarred up through her wrist into her shoulder. A small pile of pine sticks lay at her feet, not enough for the day, never enough for the night, but enough to make a mother feel she was still fighting. She stopped with the hatchet raised. The mule's hooves came slow along the frozen trail. From inside the cabin, Nakai appeared in the doorway. He did not call out. He only stood there, narrow-eyed and stiff, with one hand hidden behind the doorframe. Tavutsi saw the shape of him and knew what his fingers had found. "Nakai," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. Between the falling snow and the dark pines, a man came into sight leading a loaded mule. He wore a buckskin coat patched at the elbows, a fur cap pulled low, and a rifle slung across his back. Frost clung to his beard. His shoulders were broad, but he walked with the careful slowness of a man approaching a skittish horse. Tavutsi knew him at once as the stranger who had passed through the valley, now and again the mountain man some called Boone. She had seen him at a distance near Silas Voss's trading post, trading pelts and saying little. Men like him belonged to ridgelines and creek beds, to smoke hidden among spruce and trails no woman with children could afford to follow. She looked at the mule. Flour sack, beans, coffee, salt, canvas bundles tied tight against weather. Her face hardened before her heart could weaken. Elias Boone stopped several steps from the cabin and took off his hat. "Mrs. Red Willow," he said. His voice was low, roughened by cold and disuse. Tavutsi set the hatchet on the stump. "You are far from your camp." "Far enough." Nakai shifted in the doorway. Behind him, Toma peeked out his small face, brightening at the sight of the mule and all it carried. Tavutsi saw that brightness and feared it. A child's hope was a tender thing. Once raised, it hurt worse when it fell. "What do you want?" she asked. Elias glanced once at Nakai, then back at her. He didn't step closer. "Brought goods from Voss's post." The name struck her like a slap she had been waiting for. Her chin lifted. Did he send you to collect? No, ma'am. I told Silas I would pay when the spring baskets were done. He didn't send me. Then why are you standing at my door with his flour? Elias took a slow breath. Snow gathered along his sleeves and on the brim of the hat held in his hand. It's paid for. The words settled badly between them. Tavutsi stared at him. For a moment there was no sound but the wind dragging through the pine tops and the creak of the mule's pack straps. Paid by who? Me? Nakai came one step out of the doorway. We didn't ask you, Nakai, Tavutsi warned. The boy's jaw tightened. We didn't. Elias looked at him without anger. No, you didn't. Tavutsi felt heat rise beneath her skin, though her fingers were numb. Shame had many shapes. Sometimes it came as an empty shelf, sometimes as a child's question, sometimes as a man standing outside your house with the food you could not provide. I do not take pity from strangers, she said. It ain't pity. What else would you call a man bringing flour to a widow he does not know? Trade. Her eyes narrowed. Trade. Yes, ma'am. For what? A basket. For the first time, Tavutsi almost lost her composure. A laugh came near her throat, not from humor but from injury. She swallowed it down. A basket. In spring, Elias said. Willow work if you still make it. She studied his face. There was no mockery there, no triumph, no hunger of the kind men sometimes carried when they thought need made a woman smaller. That almost made it worse. A cruel man could be refused cleanly. A gentle one complicated everything. I have no basket ready, she said. I can wait. You expect me to believe a sack of flour beans, salt, coffee, and whatever else sits under that canvas is worth one spring basket? No. Then it is pity. It is what I can carry, and what you can name fair. Nakai stepped fully onto the porch now. In his right hand, low against his leg, was Chaska's old knife. The blade caught a dull piece of light. Elias saw it. Tavutsi saw that he saw it. Her heart tightened. Nakai put that away. The boy did not move. He ought to leave. Toma whispered from behind him, Nakai! The mule blew steam through its nostrils and stamped once. Elias remained still. Your father teach you to hold a knife point down like that? Nakai's face flushed. Don't talk about my father. I meant no harm. You don't know him. No, you don't know us either. Elias looked at the cabin, then not through the window, not prying, but with the eyes of a man who had already seen enough. I know a house gets quiet when there ain't food in it. The word struck Tavutsi so sharply she forgot the cold. Her hand went to the front of her dress, pressing the cloth there, as though she might keep her hunger from being seen. She understood then. Somehow this man knew. Whether he had heard, watched, guessed, or been told by the cruel intelligence of poverty, he knew what had happened inside her cabin. Her pride rose like a wall. You should go, she said. Before Elias could answer, another voice came from the trail. He should unload that mule before the flour freezes hard as stone. They all turned. Mina Red Willow came through the snow with a bundle on her back and a walking stick in one hand. She was small, but seemed larger because of the certainty in her bones. Her hair, braided with strips of faded red cloth, was silver at the temples. Around her shoulders she wore a worn blanket, and from her pack hung roots, herbs, and a rabbit no bigger than a man's hand. Her dark eyes moved over Elias, the mule, the children, the knife, and Tavutsi's face. Put that blade away, Nakai, she said. A knife is not a man just because a boy holds it. Nakai lowered his eyes, but did not obey at once. Mina walked to him, took his wrist, and turned his hand gently until the knife pointed toward the floorboards. Your father carried that blade to feed people, not frighten the cold. The boy's mouth tightened. He slipped it behind his belt. Mina looked at Tavutsi. You sent no word. There was no need. There is always need. You just dress it in silence. Tavutsi's face closed. This is not your burden. Mina gave a dry little sound. That is what young widows say when the roof is burning and they do not want anyone to notice smoke. Elias shifted as if to leave them to their own blood and language, but Mina pointed her stick toward him. You stay. You brought what the children can smell from here. Toma's eyes went to the mule again. He tried to hide it, failed. Tavutsi saw. That small hunger in his face weakened her more than any argument could have. Mina stepped closer, lowering her voice, though everyone could still hear. Pride keeps a soul from crawling, but it was never meant to starve a child. The words hung in the snowy air. Tavutsi looked away toward the river. The Anaimas moved under ice unseen, but speaking, always speaking. She had stood beside that river with Chaska in spring when the willows were green. He had cut branches for her baskets and teased her that her hands could make beauty out of anything that bent but did not break. She had believed herself such a thing then, bending, not breaking. But hunger did not bend a person, it hollowed. I have paid my way all my life, she said. Her voice had dropped low enough that it seemed meant for the dead as much as the living. My mother did. Her mother did. Chaska never let a man say we took what we did not earn. No one is saying that, Elias replied. You are saying it with sacks. No, ma'am. I'm saying I once believed a hungry woman when she told me she was full. Tavutsi turned back to him. The wind moved between them. Snow melted on Elias's beard and ran in a thin line down to his collar. He did not look at Nakai now, or Toma, or Mina, only at her. I was a boy, he said. My mother fed me first, said she'd eaten already. I let myself believe it because I wanted to. She died with her hand reaching for firewood. I've carried that longer than I care to speak of. The anger in Tavutsi faltered. She did not want his sorrow. She had enough of her own. Yet sorrow, when spoken plainly, has a way of entering a room without asking permission. Nakai looked at Elias differently, then not kindly, not trustingly, but with a startled stillness. Tavutsi folded her arms tight as if cold had finally gotten through everything she wore. What do you want from me, she asked. One basket in spring, Elias said, and if spring does not come, it always comes late here, but it comes. Mina nodded once, approving the answer. Tavutsi looked at her sons. Toma's lips were parted. Nakai's face was hard, but his eyes were wet with fury or hunger, or some grief too tangled to name. She looked at the flour. With flour she could make bread. Not much. Enough for tonight. Enough for the boys to sleep with warmth in their bellies. Enough to stop pretending for one evening that water was supper. The shame of accepting it was sharp. The shame of refusing it was sharper. One basket, she said at last. Elias bowed his head, not like a servant, not like a victor, but like a man accepting terms. One basket. He unloaded the mule without entering the cabin until Tavutsi stepped aside. Even then he crossed the threshold only far enough to set down the sacks. Flour by the table, beans near the shelf, salt wrapped in paper, coffee, dried apples. A cone of dark sugar that made Toma gasp softly before he covered his mouth. Last came a twist of peppermint candy. Tavutsi looked at it, then at Elias. Elias said. Mina snorted. That old crow still has a feather or two. When the goods were inside, Elias reached into his coat. His hand came out closed around something small. I was not sure whether to bring this, he said. Tavutsi went still. He opened his palm. The brass trade token lay there on its worn leather cord, the willow mark scratched into one side. For a moment, all the air left the cabin. Nakai saw it and made a sound like he had been struck. Tavutsi did not reach for it. She only stared. The token was dull, scratched, ordinary to anyone who had not watched Chaska tie it around his wrist before going to trade. Ordinary to anyone who had not seen him lay it on the table beside her baskets and smile when Silas called him honest. Ordinary to anyone who had not carried it to the post with burning cheeks and said she would return for it when she could. Her hand rose, slowly. Elias placed it in her palm. Her fingers closed around it, and something inside her face broke. Not loudly, not with sobbing, just a small collapse around the eyes, the way a snow-laden branch gives way when it cannot hold one more flake. Nakai turned his face toward the wall. Toma whispered pause. Tavutsi nodded. She pressed the token to her chest. Elias backed toward the door. I'll leave you to your supper. Mina watched him with sharp eyes. You camp nearby, up creek. Storm's coming harder. I've slept in worse. No doubt. Men are proud fools in many climates. For the first time, something almost like a smile touched his mouth. Then it was gone. He stepped outside, put on his hat, and took the mule's rope. Nakai followed him onto the porch. You think that makes you good? The boy asked. Elias stopped but did not turn at once. No. Then why do it? Elias looked back. His eyes were pale under the shadow of his cap. Because leaving would make me worse. He walked into the snow. That evening, Tavutsi baked bread. The smell filled the cabin slowly at first, then all at once, as though warmth itself had remembered the place. Toma sat cross-legged by the hearth, smiling without shame. Mina cut the rabbit into the pot with herbs and a pinch of salt. Nakai sat at the table, turning his father's token over and over in his fingers. Tavutsi worked the dough with careful hands. Flour dust clung to her wrists. She had forgotten how soft dough could feel, how alive beneath the palm. When the bread came from the iron pan, she broke it into pieces. This time, there were 3. Mina watched until Tavutsi took hers and ate. No one spoke for a while. Outside, beyond the square of lamplight, 2 men moved along the timberline. Cal Rusk had smelled bread before he saw the cabin. Hunger sharpened his face under his ragged hat. Beside him, Jonah Pike stood with his coat pulled high and his eyes fixed on the window. Thought you said that widow was near empty, Jonah muttered. Cal's gaze moved to the shadow of the flour sack just visible inside. She was, he said. A slow, ugly smile crossed his mouth. Widows got stores now. By morning the bread smell was gone, but the danger it had carried remained. The cabin woke under a hard, white silence. Snow had stopped before dawn, leaving the Animus Valley buried and watchful. Every pine wore a white shoulder. Every stump looked like a crouched thing. The river below the cabin muttered under ice, quieter than before, as if even running water had learned to keep its voice down. Tavutsi Red Willow opened the door with the hatchet in her hand and stood very still. There were tracks near the woodpile. Not Elias Boone's, not Nakai's, not Mina's small, careful steps. These were boot tracks, long and heavy, made by men who had circled instead of coming straight to the door. She followed them with her eyes. They came from the timberline, crossed near the side window. Paused where the flour sack could be seen, if a man leaned close enough, then moved toward the back wall before turning away into the trees. The cold seemed to pass through her dress and settle in her bones. Behind her, Mina, Red Willow said, "You see them." Tavutsi did not turn. Yes, Mina stepped out onto the porch, drawing her blanket tight around her shoulders. Her old eyes studied the snow with the patience of one who had read ground longer than most men had read books. Two men, she said, one heavier, one favoring his left foot. Tavutsi tightened her grip on the hatchet. Inside the cabin, Toma still slept beneath the blanket near the hearth, one fist tucked under his cheek. Nakai was awake, sitting at the table with his father's knife beside his hand. He had not slept much. Tavutsi knew because a mother knew the sound of every breath in a hungry house even after food had come. They came close, she said, close enough to smell what they wanted. Mina answered. The words settled between them with the weight of a warning. Food had changed the cabin. It had filled the shelves a little. It had put warmth in the boys' bellies. It had restored Chaska's token to Tavutsi's hand. But food also had a scent. Hope had a scent. In a starving country, even mercy could draw wolves. Nakai appeared behind them. His hair was loose from sleep, his face set hard. Who was it? Mina looked at him. Men with boots. I can see that. Then you can also see they did not knock. He pushed past her onto the porch knife already in his hand. Tavutsi caught his wrist. Put it away. They came around the house, and waving steel at shadows will not make you a man. His face darkened, wounded more by the truth than the scolding. Before he could answer, a distant sound came from the trail. Voices, men laughing. Tavutsi moved Toma's blanket farther from the door. Mina slipped inside and placed her skinning knife under a folded cloth near the table. Nakai saw and gave her a quick look. Mina said, "A blade hidden is often wiser than a blade shown." The voices came nearer. Two men emerged from the trees, breaking through shallow snow with stiff, careless strides. The taller one wore a torn black coat and a miner's hat gone shapeless from weather. His beard was red and patchy, his eyes restless. The second man was broader through the shoulders, younger perhaps, with a swollen cheek and a limp he tried to hide. Cal Rusk and Jonah Pike. Tavutsi had seen them once at Voss's post, arguing over powder and credit, men who carried failure like a bad smell. Men who laughed too loud when sober and spoke too soft when drunk. Cal took off his hat when he saw her, but the gesture had no respect in it. "Morning, Mrs. Red Willow." Tavutsi stood in the doorway, blocking the view inside. "Trail is there," Cal smiled. "Ain't lost. Then keep walking." Jonah shifted his eyes toward the cabin window. "We just wanted water. Our camp's up the creek and our canteen froze hard." Mina came to stand beside Tavutsi. "Creek is full of water." Cal's smile thinned. "Creek's full of ice, old mother. Then break it." Nakai stepped into view behind them, his shoulders tense. Tavutsi sensed rather than saw his hand near the knife. Cal's eyes moved over him, then past him, into the cabin, toward the shelf. "Well now," Cal said, "smells like this house ain't doing so poorly after all." Tavutsi did not move. "We have water outside, bread too from what I smelled last night." Jonah glanced at Cal, uneasy. "Cal, what I'm only saying, it's a rare thing out here, fresh bread after dark. Man notices." Mina's voice cut flat through the cold. "A hungry man notices food. An honest man notices the door is closed." Cal looked at her, and for a heartbeat the grin left him. Tavutsi reached beside the door, took the wooden water dipper from its nail, and pointed toward the bucket near the stump. "Drink and go." Jonah moved first. He drank quickly from the bucket, water running into his beard. Cal did not drink. He kept looking inside. Toma had woken and stood near the hearth, rubbing his eyes. His gaze fell on the stranger's face, then the man's boots, then his mother. Cal saw the boy and softened his voice falsely. Your ma keeping you fed now, little man. Nakai came forward so fast Tavutsi had to step across his path. Don't talk to him. Cal's smile returned. Boy's got spirit. He has a mother, Tavutsi said, and you have a trail. The words were quiet, but they held. Jonah set the dipper down. Come on, Cal. Cal leaned slightly, just enough to look around Tavutsi's shoulder. His eyes caught the flour sack by the table. There's folks up the creek been living on coffee grounds and boot leather, he said. Seems the Lord favors some cabins more than others. Mina took one step forward. The Lord hears what men say when they stand at a widow's door. For a moment, Cal looked as if he might spit. Instead, he put his hat back on. Didn't mean no offense. Then carry none away, Mina said. Jonah had already turned. Cal followed, but slowly leaving deep boot marks in the snow as though he wanted them noticed. No one moved until the men disappeared into the trees. Toma whispered. Matavutsi turned and knelt before him. It's all right. Nakai made a sound under his breath. No, it ain't. He was right. By noon, Elias Boone found the tracks. He had come down from his camp above the creek with his rifle across his arm and a brace of rabbits hanging from his belt. He stopped before reaching the cabin, crouched by the woodpile, and studied the ground. His face changed in no obvious way, but the stillness around him deepened. Tavutsi watched from the porch. They came for water, she said. No, her fingers tightened in her shawl. Tightened. Elias followed the tracks to the window, then around the back wall, then to the timberline. He came back with snow on his knees. They came before dawn, too. We saw. Likely they'll come again. Nakai, standing by the door, lifted his chin. Let them. Elias looked at him. Men are easier to invite than bury. I'm not afraid. That don't make you ready. The boy's face flushed. Tavutsi stepped between them with her eyes on Elias. You cannot stay in this house. I know. Her expression sharpened, surprised by the answer. Elias nodded toward the rise beyond the creek. I'll set camp there. I can see the trail. Far enough that nobody says what they got no right to say. Mina, who had been listening, gave a small grunt. At least one man in this valley has sense left. Tavutsi looked towards the rise. It was close enough for a rifle shot, far enough to keep her name clean. The thought shamed her that reputation still had to be guarded, even when hunger and danger had already crossed her threshold. I did not ask for a guard, she said. No. Then why? Elias met her eyes. Because flour draws men, and some men don't stop at flour. She looked away first. A good man does not step into a widow's house to rule it. He stands outside long enough to keep wolves from the door. That evening came early, the way winter evenings do, not falling, but closing. Elias made no fire at first. He sat among the scrub pine above the creek, wrapped in his coat rifle across his knees. Below him, Tavutsi's cabin held one square of lamplight. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin but steady. Behind him, a branch snapped. Elias did not turn fast. Fast movement got men killed. He only said, You step any closer with that knife out, boy, and your hand may forget it belongs to you. Nakai froze. After a long breath, the boy came forward. His father's knife hung at his side. How'd you know? You breathe angry. I came to see what you were doing. Watching. For them. For whoever comes. Nakai stared down at the cabin. She don't need you. No. That answer bothered him. Then why are you here? Because needing and deserving ain't the same thing. The boy frowned. Elias shifted, making room on the fallen log without inviting him outright. Nakai did not sit. You think bringing flour gives you a place here? Nakai said. No. You think standing with a rifle does? No. Then what do you think? Elias was quiet so long, Nakai thought he would not answer. I think a woman ought to sleep one night without wondering if boots are coming through her door. The boy looked at him then. The wind moved snow dust across the ridge. Below, Mina crossed past the window, her shadow bent and sharp. Tavutsi's shape followed, carrying something to the hearth. Toma laughed once inside, small and sudden, and the sound nearly disappeared in the cold. Nakai's hand loosened around the knife. My father guarded us, he said. I expect he did. He would have killed those men. Maybe. Nakai looked hard at him. Would you, if they make it needful? And if they don't, then I won't. The boy seemed disappointed or confused. Elias glanced at him. A rifle fired too soon brings more trouble than it ends. My father wasn't afraid. Fear ain't always the question. What is judgment? Nakai looked away, angry because the word was heavier than bravery. Darkness finished settling. One by one sounds sharpened the river under ice, the mule cropping frozen grass, the creak of pine trunks, the faint clink of Mina working inside the cabin. Then came another sound. Boots in snow. Elias lifted one hand and Nakai went still. Two shadows moved along the lower trail, keeping to the trees. Cal in front, Jonah behind. They had wrapped cloth around their boots to soften their steps, but snow told on everyone. Elias stood and stepped down into the open before they reached the cabin yard. "That's far enough." Cal stopped. Jonah nearly ran into him. For a moment nobody spoke. Moonlight thinned through clouds, silvering the rifle in Elias's hands. It was not aimed at their hearts, but it was not resting either. Cal laughed under his breath. "You sleep in widow yards now, Boone. Not in the yard. Close enough. Closer than you." Jonah shifted uneasily. "We don't want trouble." "Then you took a poor road." Cal's face hardened. "We're hungry, so is half the valley. She's got plenty now." "No," Elias said. "She has enough to stay alive." Cal took one step forward. Elias raised the rifle an inch. The movement was small. It stopped everything. "You going to shoot a man for asking help?" "You didn't come to ask." Cal's mouth twitched. "You don't know that. I know your horse is tied in the draw with 2 empty sacks on it. I know you circled the cabin before dawn. I know Jonah there wants to leave, and you keep pulling him back with your pride." Jonah stared at him, shaken. Cal's eyes went flat. "Careful, I am." Inside the cabin, Tavutsi had put out the lamp. She stood in the dark with Toma behind her and Mina near the table. Nakai's absence had turned her blood cold until she saw his small shape on the ridge behind Elias. He had followed the danger. Her hand pressed over her mouth. Outside, Cal looked from Elias to the cabin and back again. "There's easier food to steal than a widow's winter," Elias said. For a long moment, Cal seemed to measure whether hunger had made him brave enough to die. It had not. Jonah stepped back first. "Come on." Cal spat into the snow. "This ain't done." "No," Elias said, "but it's done tonight." The two men retreated into the trees, their shapes fading, until even their curses were swallowed by snow. Elias stayed standing until the night settled again. Nakai came down from the ridge, trying to look as if his hands were not shaking. Elias did not scold him. He did not praise him either. He looked at the knife in the boy's fist. "That blade ever been sharpened proper?" Nakai blinked, caught off guard. "What, your father's knife?" "Edge is dull." The boy looked down at it, suddenly embarrassed. "I know how to sharpen a knife." "No," Elias said gently. "You know how to hold one." Nakai's face tightened, but he did not argue. From the cabin, Tavutsi opened the door. Her eyes found her son first, then Elias. Fear, anger, relief, and gratitude all moved across her face, each one quickly hidden. "Nakai," she called, voice trembling despite her effort. The boy went to her. Elias remained where he stood outside the lamplight, listening as the door closed behind them. Snow began again, fine and quiet. He looked toward the trees where Cal and Jonah had vanished, then down at the tracks Nakai had left beside his own. Small tracks, determined tracks, a boy's tracks walking too soon into a man's darkness. Elias slid the rifle into the crook of his arm and sat back on the rise to wait for morning. Morning came pale and hard, with the kind of cold that made every nail in the cabin shrink and every breath show itself before vanishing. Nakai sat at the table with his father's knife laid before him. He had not slept much after coming in from the ridge. Tavutsi had held him first harder than he liked, her hands gripping his shoulders, as if she were making sure he had not been carried off by the dark. Then she had scolded him in a low voice so Toma would not wake, but the scolding had broken in the middle. She had turned away before he could see her face. That had been worse than anger. Now the fire was low. Mina Red Willow was outside shaking snow from a blanket. Toma still slept near the hearth, one foot poking from beneath the cover. Tavutsi moved quietly by the shelf, measuring flour with care, her back to Nakai. She had not mentioned the knife again. The silence made him feel smaller than any words would have. He picked up the blade and looked at it. Chaska Red Willow's knife had a bone handle darkened by years of hand oil and smoke. The blade was notched near the base. Nakai had always thought it looked strong because it was old, because it had belonged to his father, because Chaska had carried it on hunts and trading trips and winter trails. But Elias Boone had looked at it once and seen what Nakai had not. "Edge is dull." The words burned. Nakai rose from the table and stepped outside before his mother could ask where he was going. The snow had crusted during the night. His boots broke through with small, sharp sounds. Up on the rise beyond the creek, Elias was crouched beside a flat stone, working a whetstone along his own knife in slow strokes. The mule stood nearby, nose deep in a feed sack. A thin thread of smoke came from a small fire hardly enough to warm a man's fingers. Elias did not look up. "Morning." Nakai stopped a few paces away. "You said it was dull." "It is. I know how to sharpen it." "No," Elias said, drawing the stone down the blade again. "You know it ought to be sharp. That ain't the same." The boy's face tightened. "You talk like you know everything. I know knives." Nakai nearly turned back then. Pride told him to leave. Shame held him where he stood. Elias set his own blade down on a strip of leather and held out his hand. After a moment, Nakai gave him the knife. "Yeah." Elias weighed it, thumbed the edge, then studied the handle. He was quiet so long that Nakai grew uneasy. "Fine blade," Elias said at last. "My father's. I figured. He killed deer with it, skinned elk too, cut willow poles, made pegs for the roof. Once he cut a fishhook from my thumb when I was little. Then it has done honest work." Nakai looked at him sharply. "It can do more. A knife is a tool before it is a weapon," Elias said. "A fool learns the last use first." The boy flushed, but Elias handed the blade back without mockery. "Sit. I don't take orders from you, then stand cold." Nakai glared at him, then sat on the fallen log because his ears were already burning from the wind. Elias showed him how to hold the angle. Not too steep, not too flat, long patient strokes. He made Nakai listen to the sound of steel against stone. "That scrape there," Elias said, "that means you're biting too hard. Let the stone work. You ain't chopping wood." Nakai tried again. Slower. He tried again. Better. The word landed strangely. Nakai bent closer over the blade so Elias would not see his face. For a while they worked without speaking. The day opened around them in small mountain sounds. Ice cracking in the creek pine boughs, dropping clumps of snow, a raven calling from somewhere high and hidden. Smoke from Tavutsi's chimney rose straight for a few feet, then leaned east with the wind. After the knife took an edge, Elias cut a strip from a rabbit hide and let Nakai test the blade. It parted cleanly. Nakai tried not to smile. Elias noticed and said nothing. Later he took the boy down toward the willow thickets near the creek. He showed him where rabbits passed under bent stems, where the snow dipped in a small tunnel, where droppings lay, dark against white. "You've been walking past food," Elias said. Nakai bristled. "I looked. Looking ain't seeing." He showed him how to set a snare with a loop no wider than a fist, how to anchor it low, how to brush away human scent with snow and spruce. Nakai listened hard. He wanted every word to become meat. He wanted to walk back to the cabin with rabbits in both hands and watch his mother's face change. From the doorway, Tavutsi watched them. Mina stood beside her chewing a piece of dried root. "He is too young to carry all that wanting," Tavutsi said. "He has been carrying it since Chaska died." Tavutsi's eyes stayed on her son. "I tried to keep it from him. You kept the worst of the hunger from his mouth. You did not keep grief from his bones." Nakai crouched in the snow face intent, while Elias adjusted his hands with quiet patience. The sight hurt Tavutsi in two directions. She was grateful for it. She feared it. Every lesson made the boy stronger, but also seemed to pull him farther from the child she still reached for in the dark. "He thinks he must be his father," she whispered. Mina's face softened, though her voice stayed plain. "A boy made to carry a man's sorrow will either bend or grow crooked around it." Tavutsi closed her eyes. "I do not know how to help him. Tell him the truth before anger teaches him its own." Near midday, a mule bell sounded from the trail. Silas Voss appeared out of the white timber wrapped in a buffalo coat, riding a swayback horse and leading a pack mule with one small sack tied across its load frame. He looked offended by the weather, the valley, his horse, and whatever softness had dragged him from the post. Mina lifted her chin. "Old Crow comes walking." Silas heard her and scowled. "Old Crow brings coffee." Tavutsi stepped onto the porch. "Mr. Voss, don't start thanking me. Boone overpaid, and I miscounted. Found some goods that belong in this direction." Elias came up from the creek with Nakai beside him. His eyebrows rose faintly when Silas untied coffee, a little lamp oil, and a twist of thread. "You miscounted?" Elias said. Silas shot him a look. "You calling me a liar?" "Yes." "Well, be mannered enough not to do it in front of a widow." Mina gave a dry chuckle. Tavutsi accepted the goods with both hands. She understood the lie, and for once let a lie stand because it did not ask anyone to starve behind it. Silas avoided her eyes. "Storm may come again by nightfall. Tracks up by my place say Rusk and Pike headed north, though men like that circle when hungry." Elias nodded. "I'll keep watch." Nakai straightened a little at the mention of them. Silas saw the knife in his belt. Boy carrying steel now. Nakai lifted his chin. Elias said, learning to use a tool. Silas grunted. Good. Valley's got enough fools using weapons. The trader did not stay long. He complained about the cold, cursed his horse refused tea, accepted bread, then rode off with the expression of a man angry at his own heart. By afternoon, Nakai went back to check the snares. The first was empty. The second had been sprung and twisted. The rabbit tracks broke away clean. The third had collapsed under a clump of snow. Nakai stood staring at the failure until his breath came harsh. Elias, a few yards behind him, said, "Happens. No, it don't. It does. I did it wrong. Likely." The honesty struck harder than comfort. Nakai tore the snare from the branch and flung it into the snow. "I can't do anything." Elias stayed still. "I can't hunt. I can't keep men away. I can't feed Toma. I can't." His voice broke and rage rushed in to cover it. If Pa was here, none of this would happen. No. The answer was soft. Nakai turned on him. "He shouldn't have died." "No. He left us." The words came out before the boy could stop them. His face changed with horror, but more followed spilling now, because the dam had split. "He left us with nothing. Ma lies because of him. Toma's hungry because of him. I hate him for dying." Nakai pressed both hands to his face, but the words pushed through. "I hate myself for saying that." Tavutsi had followed at a distance. She heard the last of it and stopped as though struck through the chest. Nakai saw her and went white. "I didn't mean it." She crossed the snow and knelt before him. "I didn't mean it," he said again, smaller now. Tavutsi took his cold face in her hands. "Yes, you did." Tears filled his eyes. "And I have thought it too," she whispered. He stared at her. "I have been angry at your father for leaving me, angry at the fever, angry at the snow, angry at myself for not saving him, angry at morning because it keeps coming with work I do not know how to finish." Her voice trembled, but she did not look away. "I am hungry sometimes, Nakai. I'm afraid sometimes. I miss him until there is no room in my chest, but none of it is yours to carry alone." His face crumpled. He fell against her, and at last the boy who would not cry broke open in the snow. Tavutsi held him hard, rocking once then again. Mina stood near the trees, eyes lowered. Elias turned away and looked toward the high ridge, giving them the only privacy the open world allowed. He felt something old move inside him. A boy in Missouri, a mother on the floor, a truth never spoken in time. When they returned to the cabin, the light was fading. Tavutsi made broth with rabbit herbs and a little flour to thicken it. She ate with her sons, not much but openly. Nakai watched her take each bite as if learning a new kind of trust. For a while peace sat among them like a tired guest. Then Mina, who had stepped out to gather snow for water, did not come back right away. Tavutsi went to the door. The old woman stood beyond the porch, staring toward the ridge where dark pine met white sky. "What is it?" Tavutsi asked. Mina raised one hand. A thin line of smoke climbed from beyond the far slope, gray against the evening. Tavutsi's breath caught. "That place?" Mina nodded. "Chaska's old winter shelter." Nakai came to the doorway, eyes still red. "Nobody uses that now?" Elias stepped beside them, already studying the smoke. "Somebody is," he said. Nakai's hand went to the knife at his belt. Could be Rusk, could be Pike. The cabin seemed to grow colder. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Tavutsi looked toward that lonely thread of smoke and said, "Hunger does not ask whether a man deserves mercy." Snow thickened before dawn, not falling so much as closing its hand over the valley. Tavutsi Red Willow stood in the doorway with a blanket around her shoulders, looking toward the ridge where the smoke had risen the evening before. The line of it was gone now, swallowed by storm, but she could still see it in her mind, thin and gray above the old winter shelter Chaska had used when the hunting trail ran long. The cabin behind her held a low fire and the smell of flour broth. Toma slept near the hearth, one arm thrown across his face. Nakai sat awake at the table with his father's knife laid before him, the newly sharpened edge catching the faintest light. Mina Red Willow tied strips of cloth and dried herbs into a pouch without hurrying. Elias Boone stood near the wall, checking the hammer of his rifle, his face quiet and unreadable. "I'll go alone," he said. Tavutsi did not turn. "No." The word was calm, but it had iron in it. Elias looked up. "Trails mean, snow's hiding holes. Whoever's there may not be friendly, I know that. Then you know enough to stay." She faced him then. "I have stayed while men walked into weather and did not come back. I have stayed beside a door until my heart turned to stone, listening for steps. I will not stay this time." Nakai rose quickly. "I'm going too." Tavutsi looked at him. He lifted his chin, expecting refusal, ready to fight it, but his eyes were still red from the tears he had spent the day before. There was boyhood in him again, wounded but alive. "You will walk where Elias tells you," she said. "You will not run ahead. You will not draw that knife unless I say so, or unless there is no other breath left in you." Nakai nodded. Mina pulled her blanket tight and took up her walking stick. "The mountain has called loud enough. We may as well answer." Thomas stirred. Ma Tavutsi crossed to him and knelt. His small hand found hers before his eyes fully opened. "Stay with Mr. Voss if he comes," she said. "Keep the fire fed. Do as Mina told you with the kettle. I want to come. I know." His lower lip trembled and her heart nearly gave way, but she brushed hair from his forehead and kissed him. Some waiting is brave too. By the time they stepped into the storm, the valley had lost its edges. Pines stood as dark blurs. The creek spoke under snow and ice. Elias led breaking trail with slow, heavy steps. Nakai followed close behind him, carrying a coil of rope. Tavutsi walked after Nakai, and Mina came last, steady as an old root holding ground against flood. The climb toward the shelter was cruel. Snow hid rocks, roots, and fallen branches. Twice Nakai stumbled. Once Tavutsi sank to her knee and came up breathing hard, but she waved Elias away before he could help. Pride still lived in her, but it was no longer starving her children. It had become something cleaner now, a staff rather than a wall. Halfway up the ridge, they found tracks. Elias crouched. Snow had softened them, but not erased them. One man had passed dragging a leg. Another had gone beside him for a time, then turned away downhill. "Two," Elias said. Rusk and Pike, Nakai muttered. "Likely. Then we ought to turn back." Tavutsi looked at him. "Is that what you believe?" Nakai's jaw worked. "They came to rob us." "Yes." "They would have taken food from Toma." "Yes, then why should we help?" Mina planted her stick in the snow. "Because if we only carry mercy for those who earn it first, we will carry very little." Nakai looked away, angry and confused. They climbed on. The old shelter crouched beneath a shelf of rock half hidden by spruce and drifted snow. Chaska had built it years earlier from pine logs and mud, chinking a place to wait out storms when elk hunting took him past the ridge. Tavutsi had not seen it since before he died. The sight of it stopped her for a moment. She remembered Chaska coming home with smoke in his hair and cold in his coat. Remembered him laughing softly while Toma, then a toddler, tried to lift his hunting bag. Remembered Nakai running out to meet him, all legs and joy. The shelter had belonged to those years when leaving still meant returning. Now, its low doorway was blocked by snow on one side. Smoke leaked weakly from a gap in the roof. Elias raised one hand for silence and approached with his rifle ready. A sound came from inside, not words, a groan. He pushed the hide flap aside. Jonah Pike lay near a dying fire, curled around his own injured leg. His face was gray with fever. One boot had been cut open, showing swollen flesh dark above the ankle. His lips were cracked. A pistol lay near his hand, but he was too weak to reach it. Nakai's breath came sharp. "Leave him." Jonah opened his eyes halfway. Fear moved through them first, then shame. "Boone," he rasped. Elias lowered the rifle a little. "Where's Rusk?" Jonah swallowed. "Gone. We're down trail. Took the horse." His voice broke into a cough. "Said I was slowing him." Nakai stepped into the doorway. His face was hard. "You came to steal from us." Jonah closed his eyes. "Yes." The honesty made the shelter feel smaller. "You would have taken our flour," Nakai said. "Yes, my brother's food." Jonah said nothing. Nakai turned to his mother, pleading now with anger, because anger was easier than sorrow. "Ma," he said yes. He meant to do it. Tavutsi looked at the man on the floor. Jonah Pike was no harmless soul. He had stood at her door with greedy eyes. He had followed Cal Rusk through the dark. He had let hunger make a thief of him before the act was finished. But now he lay shaking in the shelter her husband had built, half-frozen, abandoned by the very man he had followed. The mountain gives nothing easy, but sometimes it gives a soul one chance to turn back and become better than it was. Tavutsi stepped inside. Nakai stared at her as if she had betrayed him. She knelt beside Jonah, careful of the pistol, and touched the back of her fingers to his forehead. "Fever," she said. "He does not deserve our fire," Nakai whispered. "No," Tavutsi said. "But deserving is not the only measure. He would not have helped us. Then we will be better than what he would have been." Nakai's eyes filled not with tears this time, but with the pain of learning that right and fair were not always twins. Mina came in and set her pouch down. "Move him before the storm closes worse." Elias took the pistol and emptied it, then handed it to Mina. He and Nakai cut poles from a fallen sapling and made a drag with rope and canvas. Jonah cried out when they shifted him, then bit down on his sleeve until blood marked the cloth. Tavutsi stood near his head. "You will live if you stop fighting those who are trying to carry you." Jonah looked at her through fevered eyes. "Why?" She did not answer at once. Outside, snow swept across the ridge in long white sheets. The shelter creaked around them. In one corner, carved faintly into a beam, was Chaska's willow mark. Tavutsi touched it with her gloved fingers. "Because I know what it is to be hungry and unseen," she said. "And because my sons are watching what hunger makes of us." The way down was harder than the climb. Elias and Nakai pulled the drag. Tavutsi walked beside Jonah, keeping the blanket over him when wind tried to strip it away. Mina followed, muttering to the mountain, to the snow, to Chaska, and perhaps to God. Twice Jonah fainted. Once Nakai slipped and cursed him for being heavy, then looked ashamed when Tavutsi heard. By the time the cabin came into view, smoke rose from its chimney in a stronger line. Silas Voss was on the porch with Toma beside him, both holding pieces of firewood. The trader's horse stood tied near the stump, steaming in the cold. Silas stared when he saw the body on the drag. "Good Lord," he said. "You brought pike legs bad," Elias said. "He tried to rob this house." Tavutsi looked at him. "Yes." Silas opened his mouth, shut it, then cursed under his breath and helped pull Jonah inside. They laid him near the stove. Mina cut away the ruined boot and cleaned the wound with hot water and bitter herbs. Jonah groaned, sweated, and begged once for whiskey. Silas told him whiskey was for men with better manners and worse fevers. Toma watched from the corner, frightened but silent. Nakai stood by the door. Tavutsi made broth. When Jonah woke enough to speak, he looked toward her without lifting his head. "Rusk said there'd be enough," he whispered. "Said you had more than you needed." I knew he was lying. His eyes shifted to Nakai. "I came anyway." Nakai said nothing. "I'm sorry," Jonah said. Tavutsi stirred the pot. "Sorry does not fill what you meant to empty." Jonah flinched. "But it is a beginning," she added. "Yeah." The storm pressed against the cabin through the afternoon and into evening. Silas agreed to take Jonah to the post when the trail opened, though he complained that fools always became heaviest in winter. Mina sat near the hearth grinding herbs. Elias mended a broken strap. Toma leaned against Tavutsi's side whenever he thought no one noticed. At supper, Tavutsi set bowls on the table. Broth thickened with flour, a little rabbit, bread warmed near the coals. Not plenty, but enough to bless the room with steam. She served Toma first, then Nakai, then Mina, Elias, Silas, and Jonah, who lay propped near the fire. Out of old habit, Tavutsi poured less into her own bowl. Toma noticed, so did Nakai. The room grew quiet in the way it had on that first night when a lie had stood between mother and sons like a thin wall. Tavutsi opened her mouth. Nakai broke his bread in half and placed one piece on her plate. She looked at it, then at him. "You eat, Ma," he said. His voice was low, not a command, not a plea, something stronger than both. Tavutsi's eyes shone. She did not say she had eaten earlier. She did not smile away her hunger. She took the bread, broke off a small piece, and put it in her mouth. No one spoke. Elias looked down at his bowl, feeling the old ghost inside him loosen its grip. He had thought he came to save a widow from hunger, but that was not the whole of it. He had only brought flour to a door. What happened inside that house was braver than anything he had carried down from the mountain. Days passed before the storm cleared. Silas took Jonah to the post in a mule cart wrapped in blankets and shame. Mina returned to her own lodge with a promise to come again before the moon changed. Nakai set snares and brought home one rabbit, then two. Toma learned to carry kindling without dragging it in the snow. Tavutsi kept Chaska's token near the hearth, no longer hidden, no longer pawned. When spring finally touched the Animus Valley, it came quietly. Ice broke along the river. Willow stems reddened in the low places. Snow slipped from the pines in soft thuds. The air smelled of mud bark and waking earth. Elias Boone came down from his camp one last time before riding toward higher country. Tavutsi met him by the porch. In her hands was a willow basket, tight woven and strong, with a small pattern worked along the rim like running water. Inside lay a piece of bread wrapped in clean cloth. Elias looked at it. "Mrs. Red Willow." "One basket," she said. That was the trade. The bread was not. A debt paid with dignity must be accepted with dignity. He studied her face and knew better than to refuse. So he took the basket. Nakai stood behind her, taller somehow than winter had left him. Toma waved from the doorway. Mina, who had returned that morning without explanation, watched from beside the woodpile with satisfaction tucked into the corner of her mouth. Elias tied the basket to his pack. For a moment he looked toward the cabin chimney where smoke rose steady into the brightening air. Not thin, not desperate, just smoke from a house that had survived. Then he put his hat on. Spring came, Tavutsi said. Elias nodded. Late, but it came. He swung into the saddle and turned the mule toward the high trail. Behind him the cabin stood warm against the mountains. Inside it, bowls would be filled as far as they could be filled, and Truth would sit at the table with bread. Elias rode into the thawing light, carrying a willow basket, a piece of bread, and a piece he had been chasing most of his life.